First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. It's a huge honour, and I feel very sort of unworthy in the face of all these cancer experts who will be much, much more interesting than me. But I can never turn up an opportunity to talk about my gorgeous daughter. So here I am today. So I'm Emma, and I'm the mum of Ruby, and I'm going to tell you why it is that we fundraise for cancer research in her memory. So when Ruby, my first child, was born, I became overwhelmed with this need to protect her. It was a feeling I'd really never had before in my life. I remember thinking when she was born that if somebody came to take my child away, there was another woman on the ward whose baby was being taken into care, I could kill that person with my bare hands. It was quite a shock because I was a pacifist. I didn't really know what to do with this new person. And when we brought her home from hospital, I remember moving her cot away from the window because I was scared about stray bullets. I mean, we lived in Brixton at the time, and granted, it was a little bit spicier in those days than it is now. It didn't have a Pret, but it wasn't exactly a war zone. I just saw danger everywhere. I enrolled her in swimming classes at the age of 2, the ones where you have to go with your child at 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Cycling proficiency, organic fruit and veg. I chopped up her grapes, and way beyond the point that most children were being trusted to eat whole grapes. Anyway, fast forward 17 years to 2019, and she was healthy and happy, and I was pretty damn smug. She hadn't choked on a grape. She hadn't been hit by a stray bullet. She was head girl at school. She was going on her Gold Duke of Edinburgh expedition. She was full of hopes and dreams of saving the world. Here she is with her Eton Mess banner, going on every protest march there was. And by the way, you know how nauseating it is when people boast about their children. I can't stand it, unless they're a child who's had a cancer diagnosis or the sibling of a child with a cancer diagnosis, in which case our children are amazing and we have a free pass to boast as much as we want. So there she was, healthy and happy, and I was very smug. And out of the blue, she became unwell, a whole series of odd symptoms that the GP put down to allergies or stress. But I knew in my heart was something more sinister. And eventually we got the referral for the scan that showed she had a mass in her body. And after all those years of chopping up grapes, the threat was from within her own body. You spend all that time trying to keep your child safe, and their own cells go rogue. And it's nothing, you can never be prepared for it. And in Ruby's case, it was her T cells, so her own immune system, which should be protecting her from threats, had gone ballistic and were multiplying out of control. T-cell acute lymphoblastic non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, 7 words I had no idea could be joined together and would become seared into my consciousness. And we were catapulted into an out-of-control world that I didn't recognize, where your parenting doesn't involve chopping up grapes or cycling proficiency. It involves taking them to appointments, trying to get them to take their medication, spending 6 months sleeping next to them in a hospital, trying to entice them to eat something when they feel so ghastly. And you have to put your faith in the doctors and in the treatments that have gone before, all the research that's happened before, and you keep all your fingers and toes crossed that it will work. And usually it does. This graph, I think, is absolutely amazing. It's probably familiar to many of you, but this basically shows survival rates for children diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Probably can't read this, but this bottom line shows years of survival after diagnosis. This is 10 years. And this axis is the percentage survival. So if I'd had leukemia as a young child, my chances of living 10 years after diagnosis would have been less than 1 in 10. These days, it's more like 9 in 10. I mean, this is just the most phenomenal progress. And I know it's not the same for all cancers, but I think this graph demonstrates the possibility, the power of research. But it's not enough. We all know how dangerous cancer treatment is. It's horrible. The side effects are ghastly, and it can be deadly. And it doesn't always work. In Ruby's case, it didn't work. She had 10 months of grueling treatment, so many side effects that will be horribly familiar to so many people in this room. She had mucositis, sepsis, an extravasation where an antiviral had leaked from a cannula and caused a burn so bad we had a consultant with a plastic surgeon about skin grafts. She got steroid psychosis so dramatically that my sweet, gentle, mild-mannered girl, who had no interest in football, became absolutely convinced that she'd scored the winning goal, no less, in the 1966 World Cup. She told everybody this, and then she rather dramatically tried to jump out of the window. It was a horror show, and after all of that, the treatment didn't work. She had one of those cancers that was just too aggressive. It kept coming back. It was like the Terminator. And she died 10 months after being diagnosed. And then what do? You've poured your heart and soul, every fibre of your being, into trying to keep your child safe, and it hasn't worked. And you are left utterly bereft, bereaved. The words don't do it justice, but you're sort of rudderless, untethered, and you don't know what to do with yourself. In the last meeting we had with Ruby's consultant, she'd said to Ruby, and this was as we got handed over to the care of the palliative care team, she said, there are some cancers we just haven't nailed. And yours is one of them, unfortunately, Ruby. And we will figure this one out with research. I'm really confident we will figure it out. And I'm just so, so sorry that it wasn't in time for you. And Ruby turned to us and said, can I donate my savings to children's cancer research to make that day come sooner? And these were savings that were supposed to be spent on a gap year, traveling the world. And then a couple of months after she died, I received in the post a little pin badge from another bereaved mum who I'd met on Twitter, Louise, Fred Bennett's mum. And it was a little pin badge from CCLG that said, "Be more Ruby." And it was a fundraising fund for another Ruby who died of cancer the same year as my Ruby. Ruby Stewart was 6. Like my Ruby, she loved unicorns and she hated feeding tubes. And her parents had raised a huge amount of money in her memory for childhood cancer research. And that planted the seed in our mind. And we contacted CCLG and set up a fund in Ruby's memory, the Live Kindly, Live Loudly Fund, because that's what she asked to be remembered by, her motto. And I cannot overstate how helpful it's been to us in our grief and to our friends and family and the wider community. It's given us all something to put a bit of our grief into, something to give us purpose, to make us feel positive about the future. And it's been tremendously fun, some of the fundraising we've had. So just some of the things that people have got up to. Here are her teachers and her head teacher setting off on a bike ride from London to Brighton. My insane sister doing a wing walk, Ruby's best friend shaving all her beautiful hair off on New Year's Eve, Ruby's dad Dylan doing an abseil in East London. We've also had all sorts of other activities. We've had, I've gone off one further, that's why. Oh, no, I've missed one. I deleted the wrong one. We'll come back to that in a second. We've had postcard sales and auctions and dinner parties, and they've all raised money. But even more importantly for me, they mean every time people are involved in one of these things, they're thinking about Ruby. The awareness of the impact of children's cancer is there, and that brings me so much joy. But this is absolutely my favourite fundraising activity so far. So this was just before Christmas last year, TikTok Christmas, which involved a number of special name funds, as well as eminent paediatric oncologists, the legendary Dr. Bob Phillips in the middle here, and researchers, coming together to do daft dances on TikTok in the run-up to Christmas. I have never been so far out of my comfort zone. Here is, that's you, Sarah, isn't it? There you go, give everyone a wave. There's Sarah. It was, so Bethany's Wish, which is somewhere in here as well, they kind of masterminded the choreography. It would be wonderful to get more funds involved in this Christmas if we're doing it again. Trust me when I say it works much better if you can't really dance. And as well as raising money, I think the more valuable thing about this for me was, again, it was being part of a community, coming together with others, feeling part of something. You know, Christmas is really hard when you've lost a child, and this carried us through that week in the run-up to Christmas. I guess I have to point out, because you probably can't recognise me, there I am in Ruby's orange sunglasses at the top, her dad in his Christmas jumper just behind me, an absolute joy. So do get in touch with somebody at CCLG if you'd like to take part in this. That's the postcard sales and the other bits and pieces. And last summer, so 2022, we'd raised enough money for CCLG to fund our first research project. So Dr. Lisa Russell at Newcastle and her team have a 2-year project funded by Ruby's Fund. I could try to pretend I understand what they're doing. I really don't. I stopped chemistry when I was 13, but I know it's all about finding better treatments for children going forwards. And a couple of months ago, Ruby's younger sister, Tabitha, who's here, and I went to meet the team in Newcastle, and the lovely Ellie and Lizzie from CCLG came along as well. And Tabitha actually spent a whole week with them in the lab. She's 17, working with them, understanding what they do. They were incredibly generous and kind with their time. Here she is with Phoebe in the lab. She was so happy. She lost her only beloved sibling to cancer, and it's incredibly isolating. And she said to Ellie interviewed her for a blog post on the CCLG website, which you can find if you're interested. She said something to Ellie which she'd never said to me. She said, science is a really good way for her to connect with what happened to her sister. And for her, it's the best way. And this experience of being in the lab with Lisa Russell and her team has just rocket fueled her ambitions. And she's now in the process of applying to med school. And then more recently, Ruby's Fund has been pooled with money raised from other funds to support another 3 research projects. And again, there's that lovely feeling of community and of the collective efforts of all these families joining together. And it's particularly lovely for me to see Ruby's Fund's logo on all these research projects with Fred Bennett's Don't Look Down logo, because it was Louise who brought the CCLG Special Aid Funds into our mind by sending us that pin badge. And one of those projects is Professor Roy's, who I think we'll be hearing from later. So really excited about that. And so I just want to leave you with a picture of Letty, who is one of the researchers in Newcastle. So Letty is working on live cells. She does experiments on live cells. And she explained that they're really hard experiments on live cells because it's really difficult to keep those cells alive. So she is often to be found in the lab early in the morning, late at night, and at weekends. And she says that when people ask her whether she has children, she says, yes, these cells are my children. They take up all of my time and they take up all of my love. And so now when I have one of those dark nights of the soul that we all experience, I picture Letty and her dedication to her research and finding better treatments for children towards a future where all children with cancer survive. And it brings me enormous comfort. So that's why we fundraise for childhood cancer research. Thank you.